All right, welcome back. So, this week, given that it's spring, I think we're gonna do a bunch of flowers here. So, um, we're just gonna make an arrangement with like one main central one, a couple off to the side, and some plants going in different directions. It's gonna be an interesting video because we're getting a new roof put on the building, and just about everybody who lives in the building is at home, so there's lots of noise. Just stick with me. All right. So, we're going to start off with a little C shape here, and something like a heart without a point that is upside down. That's going to be the center of the central flower. All right, next, we'll just spin out from this shape with a couple of lines that go off in a counterclockwise direction, like so. All right, stick with that. Next, we're going to come down here and start a big S shape. You know what? Why don't we start the S shape from up here, though? First, we will continue this all the way down to here, and then we'll start at the top of this shape and a big S like this down to this point. All right, now this point is where the next couple shapes are going to originate from. So we've got one curve that comes up to meet one of these legs that you drew earlier, another curve that does the same for this leg, and then we're going to draw something like two hills that come up and around the flower up here, and we'll just continue this line up to meet it, and then one more line that comes out from right around the center here and goes up and creates a sort of hill shape that goes up to there. All right, so now we've got the center of the flower going, and from here, if you start making mistakes, it's not too big a deal because the flower petals fan out and make all kinds of kind of interesting shapes that could more or less look like any generally curved line that rotates around the center. All right, so there's one, here's another, and we're going to S curve the bottom of this line maybe a couple times, go back in just to add some variation there so it doesn't look too perfect. Next, we're going to come down from close to this point that we made earlier, come up and around, and join up right there. Okay, let's keep on going. So from here, we're going to start with some trapezoid shapes. And by trapezoids, I mean shapes like this that have a curve to them. And also some more triangular shapes as well, like this. So let's start. We're going to come up and start in the middle. So if you've got one petal right here, the next petal should start somewhere in the middle of the petal before it. So I'm going to draw a sort of lopsided trapezoid right here, and another one that comes up and then goes back down this way and in here. Good. And then we'll come down here, draw a small triangle, and then we'll come across the bottom of the flower with a couple of lines that go like that. All right, almost done. Next is going to be lines that fill in the bottom of the flower and also define the central part. So the central part has a little S curve right there, and another little curve coming down here. And this edge is going to go down and to the right, and then across the bottom in a wavy pattern, then come back in towards the flower. Then we'll create another petal that does a very similar thing, except it goes up and to the right, and then back towards the center. All right. So I'm going to call that flower done. Let's move on to adding some flowers into the background that will be sort of secondary. I'm going to start with a couple of sunflowers. So let's start that right about here. So we're going to draw sunflowers. I don't know if you were in my class last year, but we went over sunflowers. And we'll draw them in a very similar way. The only difference is that as you continue towards the rose, you stop, because this rose is going to be in front of all the other flowers, so its shape takes over. Alright, we're going to start with a oval in the center, and then every petal fans out from there. So we're going to go up and give it a little bit of a motion like this. Every line pointing back towards the center of the flower, wherever it goes. This petal ended up kind of small. Let's fix that. One of the nice things is that if you get a good central flower, if the flowers around the edges don't look so great, it's not too big of a deal, because as long as the focus area of your drawing looks good, you don't have to worry about that. Alright, now let's add ends onto these flowers. You don't have to meticulously outline every end of every petal. That might be a little bit heavy-handed. So I'm just going to add a general shape on the end here to define it. I think it needs another petal in here. Maybe one in between these two that ends behind the rose. I'm going to end this petal down here and moving up to here. Now you can see a lot of the petals move in a sort of downward direction until they stick straight up, at which point they start moving in a backwards direction this way. And that's just because of gravity pulling everything downwards towards the ends, so it doesn't stick out quite as far to the left. Alright, I think that's good for that flower. Let's add another big flower right here. This one is going to be sort of your more traditional, gosh, I wish I knew flowers better. It's going to be a central view of a sort of more simple flower. So we'll go with big circular type petals with just a little bit of an angle to them. Alright. So in general, the petals are, let's get our practice paper out again. In general, the petals are circular, but they have a bit of a corner to each end, whereas this is the center. Okay, so not perfectly circular because it gives it a more organic feeling. It also helps if they're not all exactly the same size. Some of them are a little bit larger than others. Alright, so we're adding the petals that are in the background, and you want to sort of try to find places where there's a seam between two petals and cover that with a petal in the background, like this. Good. I think that's enough for that flower. Let's do one that is sort of aiming down this way. So this will be a slightly different shape. The overall shape of the flower is going to have an ellipse at the rim of the petals, and the underside of the flower is going to be showing down here, so it's going to be a sort of this shape. All right. So the petals from the side view like this are going to come out from the bottom and go towards the edge like this. I'm going to erase this rim so that I don't have too clear of a guide, but it just becomes a more organic shape. Alright, next, it's going to be very helpful to have a big center defined to this flower, and maybe just a couple lines here and there that hint at the direction of the petals on the underside. Good. Alright, let's add, you know what, why don't we add another rose? And it's easier for me to draw a rose that's facing up, so what I'm going to do is actually just turn the paper over and draw another rose, and I'll make this one a little bit more simplified. So we're going to start with a spiral in the middle and add a bulb shape onto the edges of this spiral, and then we're going to start adding petals. Alright, good. So we just need a couple more touches to finish this drawing up. I think it's going to need some plant material going every which way to sort of fill things out. So let's draw a couple demonstrations of what that might look like. One thing I want to make sure of is that each little branch that I draw coming off of here is pointing back towards the center. So I'm going to go out this direction with a leaf, just a sort of teardrop shape, and then another leaf that's pointing the other way, and then get smaller and smaller, repeating the same shape up and in this direction. So that's probably good for right there. I could probably continue it, just being careful not to go underneath where any of these flowers are. Go over top of where any of these flowers are. Alright, let's add another like sprig of greenery down here. So this one is going to be, it always helps me to draw things going upwards, so I'm going to turn the paper again. This is going to be little star-shaped leaves like this. So you just sort of draw a circular blob shape where each arm of the blob goes back towards the center. So we're going to repeat this shape at different sizes and different number of stems or leaflets, basically. You can do 4, you can do 5. Variation is the key. If everything looks exactly the same, then it doesn't quite fit. But if everything looks so dissimilar, there isn't any repetition to keep our eye interested. This would be one of those times where if you look in the settings of the YouTube app, it's possible that there is a 2x playback speed. You can just power through these parts where I'm just drawing. You don't need to watch every second of it, but it's here if it helps you. Alright, let's go with another sprig with leaves that go this way and alternate. They're a little bit larger this time. Again, we're repeating a shape that's up here, but it's slightly different to give some variation. Alright. Now we'll just do a couple more of each of those things. I think right here I'd like to do a leaf plant that instead of alternate branching, it branches in sets of 2 leaves like this. Getting smaller and smaller as it goes towards the tip. And we'll just put 1 at the tip right there. Alright, next we will add, let's do another large sprig that's coming out from the center. I don't know why I'm digging that word sprig today. Alright, there we go. Cool. I think this is plenty to start coloring. So I'll just show you a couple demonstrations of some colors that I really like, and you can pause the video and take note of that. I'll also point out what looks really good about those things. So this is the composition that we're basing this drawing off of. And as you can see, it doesn't have a rose in the center, but it has a more traditional flower. But let me point out some of the places where this drawing really excels, and I'll try to make sure to leave a link to this in the description so that you can see it better digitally. Where this excels is there's a lot of white left on the highlights of the flowers, especially the roses. The artist was thinking about how the light comes across the flower and how it touches the tips of the petals, and then the recesses where the flower petals bend inwards towards the center are a cooler and darker color. I don't know if you can see the hue very well, but if you check the link, you'll see a nice dark purple right there and a warm magenta as it comes up towards the edge of the petal. That's very helpful in adding depth to the flower and also varying the color of the shadows. If you have warm lights, you want cool shadows. The same applies to this flower in the center. You've got a sort of traditional purple color that is slightly reddish purple and a much more blue-violet color in the center. So you've got reddish or warm purple lights and blue-purple darks. So there's a little bit of a variation there that keeps the hue moving. If you have markers, that would be great. Another point that I'd like to make is how the leaves are very different in their coloration. So these are yellow-green on the rim and red at the base. These are teal at the rim and they have a spot of purple at the base. Here we've got blue-green and magenta and just straight up yellow-green. So keeping your colors moving back and forth between hues is going to be really a great way to get this thing to vibrate. Speaking of sort of vibrating color, this image right here shows a really great example of what you can do with a drawing like this. Again, all the same things are at play here. Cool shadows, warm lights, lots of white spots left at the rims of the petals just to show off that light and get it to sparkle. Variation in color. You'd call this a red rose, but you see blue and purple here. And you'd call this a purple rose, but there's yellow at the tips and some brown in the center, so there's a lot of variation. You've got flowers up here that have white in the center of the petals and blue at the tips. And then there's all these little leaves of greenery throughout that help to contrast. When you have contrast, like a really cool color against a really warm color, the colors come alive and make each other shine just by contrast. Alright, so I think that's all for now. Let's have you work on this, and I'll see you next video. Thanks, bye.